Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The Alpha's Scarlet Secret. Episode 2. Chapter 9. Scarlet's eyes fluttered shut for a moment before she froze. Her eyes suddenly widening. No. All he would do was hurt her, use her, and toss her aside like the rest. And then what about her heart? Why? What are you interested in? She asked quietly, trying to pull her wrists from his hold. Elijah sensed the shift in her and looked into her eyes. Releasing one hand, he ran his fingers through her soft hair, the smell of her shampoo wafting into his nose. "Is that even a question?" he asked quietly. "Stop thinking with your head, Scarlet." His fingers caressed her neck, traveling down over her and leaving pleasure. "The only reason you want me is because I'm the one woman you can't have," she said bitterly. Pushing him away, she tried to sit up. Elijah moved off her, his eyes now sharper as he looked at her. He did not have an answer. He found her incredible, and he knew he wanted her only for that reason. "Then what about you? Why do you get so turned on every time I touch you?" he asked, holding her chin. A flash of hurt crossed her eyes. "Don't pretend to try to know me. I have nothing to say to you. Just leave, please. Back off," she said, about to get off the bed. Elijah took her by the wrist and pulled her close, their noses inches apart. "You want me just as much as I want you. Give in to your desires, sweetheart, and I'll make you feel so good you won't ever want another man to touch you," he whispered huskily. That was what she was afraid of, that she would be so hung up on him that when he was done. The temptation to give in was growing. She looked away, knowing she needed to put room between them or she might do something she regretted. His closeness, those gorgeous eyes, his scent, everything was getting to her. She stood up, needing to get out of there. He tugged her back, spinning her into his arms and taking her by surprise. She fell into his lap. Her heart hammered. She felt it press against his hardened bulge as she sat straddling his lap. She pressed her lips together, not trusting the sounds that may escape her. Here he was, offering her what she'd dreamed of. He took her chin. She really was a stubborn one. She was the first woman who had not fallen to their knees before him. He knew she wanted him. He leaned closer, brushing his lips against hers. Even his own actions surprised him. He'd never treated a woman so softly. Heck, if a woman wasn't interested, no matter how rare it was, it never bothered him. He'd just move on. There were plenty of fishes in the sea after all. A soft gasp escaped her as he ran his tongue along her lips, rewarded by a soft moan. "Elijah, don't," she murmured, despite her hands now holding on to his shoulders. The way she felt so good straddling him. "At least let me give you a taste of what I can offer." He tugged on her lower lip, biting back a groan. "You're so tempting." "I don't know," she murmured as his hand went to the zip on her leather pants. He pulled it down, making her tense. His lips claimed hers in a rough, hungry kiss, making all sane thoughts leave her. His tongue ravished her mouth, kissing her dominatingly. She moaned as all sense of logic left her and kissed him back with equal hunger. She kept fighting for control, despite knowing she was losing. Elijah smirked against her lips. It was the first time a woman put up a fight. He was an alpha and he loved control, but it did not mean he didn't like the game. He muttered, his fingers parting her smooth lips with ease, wanting to see what she looked like but knew he could not push it, not today. Elijah, she breathed, one hand now tangled in his hair and the other around his neck. She let out a delicious moan the moment his fingers ran along her soaking slit. Oh! Pleasure coursed through her as he began playing with her. No longer bothered about holding back, she moaned in pleasure, gasping when one finger suddenly intruded in her. Her eyes widened as she looked into his eyes, her own hazed with wish. "You're tight," he said, kissing her lips hungrily. He moved his finger tortuously slow, making her growl. "Harder," she muttered, kissing him rougher. "Tell me exactly what you want, sweetheart, don't tease." "As you wish," he said, satisfied. Hearing those words only made his own pleasure heighten. "You're delicious," he murmured, thinking she was the tastiest thing he had ever had. Now that he'd had a taste, he wanted more, way more. Their eyes held each other, Elijah's hands now on her as he squeezed it. "Think about it," he said. "Don't get too ahead of yourself." "I said I'll think about it," she said, sliding off his lap. She wanted more. He leaned back on his dark blue bed sheets, resting on his elbows. "We both know the answer's going to be yes," he said. "Whatever," she said, rolling her eyes. There was just something about his stepsister that no other girl had, and he knew this was going to be a game that would end in him being addicted to her. He pushed the thought away, not wanting to ponder on the risks of this new relationship between them. Whatever it was. Their eyes met and both knew they were treading dangerous waters. If this ever got out, they were meant to be siblings. Their parents would be scandalized. But something about the forbidden aspect of it only made it more exciting. That was something they both silently agreed on, even if neither spoke it. Scarlet turned away from those tempting eyes. Her lips looked sore, her hair more tousled than normal, her face looking gorgeous with her glow. "Red," Elijah called her as she reached the door. Her hand froze on the handle, glancing back. "Whatever the problem is, with Hank or whoever, you have me in your corner. Regardless of everything else, I'm your alpha, I will protect you. Don't think you can't talk to me." Her heart skipped a beat, his words warming her within, but she kept her face smooth. She simply nodded and exited the room. Elijah dropped back on the bed, the smell of her lingered in the air. Next time he'd make sure she returned the favor. The next morning Scarlet trained alone again, and this time Elijah did not disturb her. After what happened last night, both were unsure on how the other would be when they came face to face. Although last night's events had awakened a deeper desire in them both, they were uncertain on the extent of the other's interest when they were not so high on alcohol. But Elijah himself knew he wanted her. He could not even think of another woman, not when she consumed his mind. It disturbed him slightly that he had taken such a strong interest in anyone, something that he had never experienced before. After training at dawn, Scarlet had returned home. Showering in a bathroom that smelt strongly of Elijah was difficult, the steamy room a clear sign he was back from training too. Sighing inwardly, she got dressed in a pair of jeans and an oversized off-shoulder white top. She paired it with white flats, had her hair open and her lips painted a nude today. With a coating of eyeliner and mascara she was ready. She walked downstairs feeling a little nervous to face him. Entering the kitchen, she saw the bleak sunlight shine through the windows, casting a dull glow around the white kitchen cabinets. The delicious smell of the full English breakfast her mother was finishing up cooking enveloped her senses. Indigo was setting the table, yawning away. Jackson and Elijah were sat at the table. Elijah glanced up when she entered, but she avoided his gaze. "Morning," Scarlet said, walking over to the table, ruffling her hair. "Good morning, dear," Jackson said, giving her a small smile. Scarlet smiled, going over and giving him a kiss on his forehead. Her scent tickled Elijah's senses as his eyes roamed her body for a second before he looked away smoothly. "You get the food," Indigo grumbled, sitting down groaning. "It's not fair, Elijah tortured us all." "You're complaining about Elijah now? That's different." Jackson chuckled. "I'm glad he's putting the effort in." Jessica smiled as she and Scarlet carried the 2 platters containing toast, bacon rashers, sausages, eggs, hash browns, roasted mushroom and tomatoes. "I think everyone needed a little push," Elijah said. "A little brutal considering last night was a party," Indigo grumbled. Scarlet added food to her plate, taking her seat next to Elijah's. Much to her dismay, it was the only seat left after Jessica took the one next to Jackson. "Who said to drink so much then?" Jessica scolded. "You knew?" Indigo asked, surprised, then grinned as she began helping herself to food. Elijah noticed how Scarlet made sure her leg or arm did not brush his. He instead parted his legs even more, moving one close to hers as he purposely brushed her hand when he reached for the baked beans. She glanced at him as a tingle of pleasure rippled through her, her heart skipping a beat before looking away quickly. She crossed her legs to avoid his knee touching her, remembering how she had straddled him last night. "So, either of you care to explain what happened last night?" Jackson asked seriously, staring at them. Scarlet froze, her eyes widening as Elijah simply raised an eyebrow questioningly. "With Hank," Jessica added, seeing Scarlet's frozen expression. "Oh, nothing much. He was overly drunk," Scarlet said, "and I lost my temper." Elijah glanced at her, wondering why she did not just say it as it was. He frowned but said nothing. Jessica sighed, placing her fork down and ruffling her black hair. "Scarlet, how many times do I need to tell you that you cannot lose your temper like that? It's disrespectful." Belonging to the Alpha's family, you can't just treat your pack members like that. Your brother will become Alpha soon," she said, wondering why Scarlet had to make things so difficult. Both Elijah and Scarlet exchanged looks at the last comment, last night clear in both their heads. Scarlet looked away, her heart thumping with guilt that she had done something so taboo, and guilt that she had enjoyed it so much. "I don't think," Elijah began. Scarlet's hand went to his thigh, squeezing it and making him tense. "Please don't get involved, I can handle myself." Her voice came through the mind link. He frowned, thinking she really needed to stop pretending that she could handle everything. "Scarlet, I know Hank is very headstrong, but he is Elijah's Delta and will take over soon enough. I need you to stay cordial with them all. They are your future leaders," Jackson said gently. Scarlet nodded, knowing it was only because of Jackson and her mother she was even staying quiet, not wanting to hassle them. She knew if she made a big deal of what those boys had done, it would only cause unrest and trouble within the pack. She could defend herself, but her mother had taken years to be as confident as she now was. Her biological father had spent years breaking her, and it had taken Jackson years to heal her. Elijah watched her. It was not often Scarlet stayed quiet. He frowned thoughtfully as they continued eating and the topic shifted to lighter things, although Scarlet did not contribute. "There's some business I need to attend to out of town, and I was thinking it would be good for Scarlet to join me, to learn about pack relations and stuff," he said suddenly, making Scarlet look at him. "You wanted to meet your father to settle things, didn't you?" he asked through the link. She did not reply, thinking time alone with Elijah was not the smartest thing now. "That sounds like an excellent idea," Jessica said in approval. Jackson looked at Scarlet, who gave a simple nod. "Perfect. How long are you leaving for, and where exactly are you going?" Jackson asked. "Not too far, towards Manchester. It's regarding some talks to an ally with a pack up that side. I met the new Alpha a few months back." It was not a complete lie, they would stop there on the way back. "Sounds excellent, all the allies we can get are welcome," Jackson said, knowing there was growing unrest when it came to rogues over the last few months. "When do we leave?" "I need to let the salon know I'm not coming in," Scarlet said as Jessica sighed. "I don't understand why you are even working there." "Mom, please," Scarlet said. Jackson placed a hand over his wife's and Jessica simply shook her head. "We'll leave around 5. Pack enough for a week or so," Elijah said. Scarlet nodded, thinking about a road trip and a week away with Elijah. Despite her fighting the thoughts, she felt pleasure pool in her lower regions just considering the possibilities. She pushed the thoughts away before everyone at the table smelled her. "No fair. Can I not come?" Indigo asked, pouting. "You still have a few weeks of school left," Jackson reminded her with a smile, his blue eyes twinkling. "Life is so sweet," Indigo said. "Next time, kiddo," Elijah said, giving her a smirk. It was incredible how different he saw both the sisters. One was like his own kid sister, and although he knew it was hypocritical, he always had just seen her as his little sister. On the other hand, the image of Scarlet riding his hand and moaning in pleasure flashed through his mind, and he felt himself twitch. She was a tease. Once breakfast was over, Scarlet headed into town to the salon, working for a few hours and booking her leave on the pretense that a family member had passed away. She returned around 2 p.m., stopping at Amelia's cottage at the edge of the park grounds. She hoped the woman was home. She looked at the box of freshly baked biscuits from a bakery in town she had bought as an offering, wishing she had got something else too. Before she could regret it or go grab something else, the door was opened by Amelia. "Afternoon, Grandma," Scarlet said, flashing her a small smile. "Good afternoon, dearie. I wasn't expecting you," Amelia said, stepping aside and allowing the young woman in. She was dressed in a knee-length skirt and a black blouse, her brown eyes watching her sharply. "You're canceling on me, aren't you?" Scarlet looked at her guiltily. She had come to cancel Friday's dinner, but it seemed Amelia had already guessed it. "Yes, I have to go out of town with Elijah for pack stuff, but I promise once I'm back I will make it up to you," Scarlet said, looking around the cozy cottage. It was a 4-room cottage. A bedroom, a bathroom, and a small library led off from the main room, which consisted of the kitchen area, the small dining table and sitting area. The walls were covered in old photos and many oil paintings of sceneries that Scarlet knew her son had made. "That's fair enough. Now sit down and I'll make you a cuppa. I can't eat all those biscuits by myself," Amelia said as Scarlet smiled. "Do you need me to do anything whilst you're making the tea?" she asked. Amelia looked at her with a devious smirk. "Well, since you asked, I need to have some coriander picked from the garden. Make sure you don't pull the roots up, just cut the stem," she warned. Scarlet pouted. "You gave me that job because you know I hate gardening, yes?" Amelia said. Scarlet sighed, taking the knife and exiting through the back door. Coming back after 10 minutes with neatly cut coriander. Good enough," Amelia said, inspecting them just in case even one was uprooted. She motioned for her to sit at the wooden circular table that only had 2 chairs. 2 cups of fresh steaming mugs of tea sat on the table and the box of biscuits sat open. "I do love your tea," Scarlet said. Amelia always boiled her milk on the cooker, adding the tea bags and cardamom to the silver pot. A tea she learned how to make from a friend. "Well now, drink up before it gets cold," she said, watching Scarlet with a small smile on her lips. She had known from the moment the woman with the 2 young girls, covered in bruises and injuries that had not healed, entered pack territories that Scarlet had been sent for something much more important. Amelia herself was an ordinary wolf, one that had no special ability, but she had a dream once long ago of a special she-wolf who would come to their pack on a full moon. One who would need to be kept hidden until she was ready for what destiny had in store for her. She knew the dream was more than simply a dream. the voice in it was ethereal and beyond this world, like a song in the breeze, yet so deep and melodious it made you shiver from the sheer power and serenity it held. She admitted it sounded crazy, but she had her own assumption to whom the voice may have belonged to. Years after that dream, when she had almost forgotten it, Scarlet had shown up. The moment Amelia had gone to see what the commotion was about and had laid eyes on the little girl, instantly the dream had flooded back into her mind, as fresh as if it had only been yesterday since she had dreamt it. It was common for surviving mates to die or go insane at the loss of their mates, especially alphas. But somehow Jackson had not gone feral, a miracle in itself, and everyone put it down to Jessica. But Amelia often wondered if the young fiery child had anything to do with it. From the moment she had entered the pack, when the warriors had cornered them, Jessica carrying her 6-year-old and pleading for refuge, fear and desperation in her navy blue eyes. Scarlet had been sharp and observant. Despite the marks over her body, her eyes remained defiant and her will remained strong. Not showing even an ounce of fear at the wolves that surrounded them. It was because of Scarlet. Even rogue attacks became less frequent over the years, and although everyone put it down to stronger patrolling and the fear of the pack's ever-growing power, Amelia knew it had something to do with Scarlet. It was because of her. Amelia had openly supported Jessica's entrance into Jackson's life. When Scarlet had shifted, Amelia had not been surprised. She was expecting something, and when she saw the silver-grey wolf that shone like the moon, leaving many in awe and fear, Amelia had been satisfied that she had not made the wrong assumption. Unlike the pack, who had started treating her with fear or contempt, not understanding why her wolf was so big, something that worried them more than her pure silver fur, Amelia had comforted Scarlet. Their bond had always been strong, but since she shifted, Scarlet had become more reserved, and Amelia felt as if she was hiding something from her. "The tea is lovely," Scarlet said, bringing her out of her reverie. Taking a biscuit, Amelia nodded over her cup of tea. "It is indeed," she said, her eyes twinkling with wisdom and secrecy. Elijah entered the pack house, heading to his office on the second floor. It was pretty quiet, with most wolves having left to go about their daily duties. The pack house itself looked like a very modern mansion. Unlike the Alpha's mansion, which was a traditional building, everything was in a minimalist design in here, catered for mainly newly mated wolves or single young adult wolves who wanted their own privacy. He was here to go over a new training regime with Aaron and Liam that he wanted implemented, and he also was going to have a word with Hank. He unlocked his office door using the passcode. A small beep and click was heard, and he opened the door. He stopped in his tracks when he saw Fiona sitting cross-legged on his desk, wearing a tiny red lingerie set. Her makeup was seductive and she had her long hair curled. Elijah did a once-over. She was not the one he wanted. He looked at her, his face emotionless. "Care to explain why you're in my office?" he asked, walking around to his desk, she covered in a tiny thong. She looked over her shoulder, feeling satisfied when his attention fell to her. "What does it look like?" she said bravely, flipping her legs over the desk and grabbing his shirt to pull him in between them. Elijah looked down at her. She was trying to act brave, but he could smell the alcohol on her breath and the trembling in her hands. It really did dampen brave act she was trying to put on. "I'll do whatever you want me to," she pleaded, placing kisses on his neck, wishing he'd give in, wanting him so badly she started grinding herself against him, feeling frustrated when she didn't feel even a twitch from his d-ck. "I want you to get out then," Elijah said, taking her wrists and freeing himself from her clutches. She was gorgeous, but she was not Scarlet, whom he desired. Sure, it felt good having her rub herself on him, but it didn't excite him like it would have once upon a time. If this were months back, or a year, he would have torn that lingerie off her, bent her over this very desk and taken her several times. "Eli Alpha, please, all I want is to please you, just let me try, I don't mind who else you have or want," she pleaded. Elijah frowned, feeling his anger surfacing. "The only thing I want is you to get out of here, Fiona. We're done. We were nothing more than casual partners and I told you I'm done. I'm trying to contain my anger, because of our past, don't push me too far," he said, his voice cold. She whimpered at the alpha power emanating from him. "Is there someone else?" she asked tearfully. "There was no emotional attachment to you from the beginning, and yes, I may have a new interest. Now leave before your brother shows up and I get him to escort you out," he growled. Fiona stood up, tears falling down her cheeks. "I do love you, Elijah, I always have," she whimpered as she backed away from him, picking up her long coat. "Then you never should have got involved with me. I have nothing to offer, never will, not to you anyway," he said, knowing it was harsh, but the woman wasn't getting the hint. "Is it Kira?" she asked, sobbing. "Chucky?" "No," Elijah said, smirking as he remembered Scarlet's comment from the night before. "Then who?" "I'm one of the prettiest she-wolves here," Fiona said, not even noticing his smirk as she wiped her tears away, her makeup looking a little messy now. "Let's just say she's the prettiest she-wolf around," Elijah said, getting a little irked with her now. Did the woman not get the hint? He didn't want to manhandle her, but she was really trying his patience. Fiona looked confused. "Everyone says Scarlet's the prettiest and then me," she said, wondering who this mystery she-wolf is. Elijah raised an eyebrow, thinking, well, at least she was not dumb. Scarlet was gorgeous. "Scarlet? Is she?" he said casually. Fiona nodded, glad that the she-wolf was his stepsister, or she would surely have had her as competition too. Sensing Elijah's growing annoyance, she backed away towards the door. "Fiona." She stopped, hope surging in her chest when she turned to look at him. "Yes, Alpha?" she asked. "Never enter my office without my permission. Ever," he said, his voice dangerously low. Her heart surged with sadness and she nodded before she ran out, tears streaming down her cheeks. Elijah shook his head annoyed, as he walked over to the door to reset the stupid code. Fiona was one of the rare ones who knew it, as she used to be his booty call often enough. Now that he had returned, a new code was needed anyway. He had just finished when Hank strolled down the corridor, hands in his pocket, looking as arrogant as ever. His black hair clear that he had just come out of the shower. "Morning, Alpha," he said as Elijah led the way back into the office and leaned against his desk, motioning for Hank to take a seat. Hank smirked, sitting down. "So why am I beckoned, mighty leader?" he said mockingly. Elijah frowned at him. "I'm not in the mood to joke with you, Hank." Both siblings were really getting to him today. "It's because of last night." "Yeah, well, you can still see these haven't healed," Hank growled, pulling down the collar of his shirt to show the 3 scratches he had gotten from Scarlet before she had punched him. Elijah hid his shock. Why hadn't they healed by now? Hank was a werewolf, a strong one at that. The scratches should have healed. "She's a freak." "Watch it," Elijah growled, trying to calm his anger. Why was he getting so worked up over an insult towards Scarlet? "If she's a crazy, then why did you even go near her?" "She's a crazy one. I'm sure you know what I'm after," Hank said, smirking. Elijah's eyes flashed with anger, grabbing the man in a fury and slamming him against the wall, his eyes a dark cobalt blue. "She's not interested, so stay away from her," he growled, anger swirling around him. "So, it's okay for you to hurt my sister, but I can't hurt yours," Hank snapped coldly. A loud growl tore through Elijah's throat, stilling even Hank. He had always thought Elijah did not care for Scarlet, but he was now acting like she was his property or something. "Scarlet isn't a whore unlike your sister," he spat, feeling a little guilty for calling Fiona one. But he was not going to tolerate Scarlet being bad-mouthed. "Fine. I get it," Hank said. Elijah's hold on his neck was painful and he did not want to annoy off his future alpha. Elijah dropped him to the floor, his eyes cold as night. "I know there's more between you and Scarlet, and I will find out what it is. If there's anything that goes against my beliefs, even the goddess will not be able to protect anyone from my wrath. No one in this pack is irreplaceable, remember that. Now get out." Elijah spat, glaring at the man. Hank nodded. "Yes, Alpha," he said, although his face did not show the unease that had settled within him. "Scarlet would not mention it, would she?" "She better not." The door shut after Hank. Elijah took a deep breath, trying to calm his raging anger and letting out a loud growl before he punched the wall hard. Destroying the paneling completely, he growled. Today had not gone the way he wanted. It was later in the afternoon. Elijah and Scarlet were about to head out. As always, Scarlet was running around last minute, having apparently forgotten something or other. "Seriously, Scarlet? You had all day to pack?" Jessica called from the kitchen where she was working on a huge batch of cupcakes for a baby shower. "Mama, I need my charger," it's not my fault I forgot it," Scarlet shouted as she ran down the steps 2 at a time, jumping the last 4 and running over to where the bags were. "All done," she said breathlessly. Jackson and Elijah looked at her. "You're crazy," Elijah said, trying not to focus on how her chest was heaving or how her hair fell in front of her eyes messily. Jackson chuckled as Scarlet glowered at Elijah. "You're not that late," Jackson said, hugging her. "I'm sure this trip will be beneficial to you both." The two exchanged looks, both thinking about the alone time that this trip bought them. Scarlet said as she was about to grab her suitcase, when Elijah reached down and took it from her. She had packed a lot more than him, although she had tried to minimize it as much as possible. "I can manage." "I didn't say you couldn't," he replied. Scarlet did not argue and went to say goodbye to her mother instead. Stepping outside, she saw Elijah had finished putting the luggage in the front compartment of his gorgeous red Audi RN Spider, with no space left for his own bag. He placed it behind the seats instead. "You sure packed a lot," he said, moving her seat forward so his bag would fit. "Well, when you waste money on such expensive cars that can't even store a decent amount of luggage, this is what happens," she retorted. Secretly she loved the car. He had ordered it before even arriving back home and she had been so jealous, but he did not need to know that. "This car is cute, so stop being jealous and get inside," Elijah retorted, getting into the driver's seat. She frowned. "I'm not jealous," she said, getting in and admiring the sleek interior. About to say something more as Elijah got in, fiddling with his sat-nav, she froze. Her stomach twisting in knots when she saw the red lipstick mark on the corner of his shirt from under his jacket collar. Jealousy and anger filled her, her chest rising and falling as she tried to contain her raging anger. How dare he think he could play her? Even if it was just for pleasure, she was not okay with him being with other women in the same period. Was she just a game to him? He thought he could just do whatever else he wanted? Even if she hadn't given him an answer yet, it did not make it right. She put her belt on, crossing her arms, and looked out the window. Elijah glanced at her. She had suddenly gone quiet and he could feel the anger radiating off her. "You okay, Red?" he asked, raising an eyebrow as he looked at the back of her head. "Perfectly." Her icy reply came and he felt the power radiating off her. Although it did not affect him, it was strong. "Okay," he replied, having no idea what caused her mood change as he drove out of the mansion drive and wondering what this trip would bring for them. It had been nearly 2 hours since they had been on the road. Scarlet had remained silent, that cold, angry aura still surrounding her. Elijah had tried to make conversation a few times, but she gave one-word replies, her eyes never leaving her phone or the window. His own patience was running out and it was taking his all not to snap at her. "Want to stop for a break?" he asked, indicating as he got off the motorway and headed into the nearest town. Scarlet had not even noticed he had diverted from the route. It seemed she was always terrible at directions. something that she was made fun of plenty of times for during tracking training. No, she said. Elijah frowned, and once it was safe to do so he parked up. Only then did she look around to see him raising an eyebrow at her. "You need anger," she said, making him smirk despite the annoyance he was feeling. "Seriously?" he scoffed. "Well, why did you stop in the middle of nowhere?" she asked, frowning at him. "Because you're in a mood and it's annoyed me off," he said. "Shame," she said, returning to her phone. Elijah frowned. Pushing his seat back, he unstrapped her. "Hey! What are you doing?" He did not reply, pulling her into his L.ap roughly. She raised her hand to give him a good slap, but he grabbed her wrist. "I'm still your alpha," he growled. "Don't use that on me." She growled back. His cobalt blue eyes glared into her fierce silver ones. "Then tell me what your problem is." She was not going to just give in to him so easily. She was not something to be used. She demanded respect. "You know what the most annoying thing is? That you don't even know what the problem is," she snapped. He looked at her gorgeous face, caressing her waist. No matter how angry she was, although she looked annoyed, he didn't like her being annoyed with him. She glared at him and tried shoving his hands off her, but he didn't remove them. "Then tell me, come on." "I'm backing down," he said tersely. As an alpha, backing down was a complete foreign aspect to him. His words surprised her too, and her heart skipped a beat. "This," she said, gripping his t-shirt and tugged it forward. Elijah frowned, looking down until he saw the smear of red. Realizing it must have been from Fiona earlier. "That's not what it looks like." "Wait. Why do you care?" he asked, smirking. Was she jealous? "Because even if the option you put on the table is purely asterisk, I demand some respect. If you want me, then there can't be any other woman in that span of time. I know your past, Elijah. You are linked with more than one girl on the same day, and Fiona's seemingly been okay with it. But I am not the type of she-wolf who's going to go cry in a corner because the precious alpha just uses her as one of his side pieces. If you want me to even consider the deal, then let me make one thing clear. It's either only me or you can forget about it," she said icily. Elijah's smirk was only growing with every word that left her lips. God, was she sweet! Something about her strong personality was a turn-on. He kissed her neck softly, making her tense. Hearing her racing heart, he placed more teasing kisses up her neck until his lips grazed her ear, her scent filling his nose. "I know you're not like the rest, that's one of the reasons I find you so sweet," he murmured, making her shiver. Her straddling him was only making him want her right there. It was taking a lot not to get hard, although he was failing considerably. "This morning when I went to the pack house, Fiona was in my office. Nothing happened. She tried to come on to me and I told her I'm not interested, there's someone else on my mind," he said, surprising himself that he was even bothering to explain whilst running his fingers through her hair. Scarlet felt a pang of guilt at her assumption. She pouted, tossing her hair. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Elijah smirked. She was kind of cute when she was obviously feeling bad. The urge to tease her was only so welcome, and he was not going to pass up on it. "Well, if I wanted her, I wouldn't have been jerking off at the thought of you the other night in the shower, now would I?" he said, satisfied when a light blush graced her cheeks. Her gorgeous now green eyes widening as she looked at him. "Wait, you mean, that night you were thinking of?" She thought that it had only been her who had such thoughts about him. Elijah smirked as he watched her struggle to say something. She looked into his blue eyes that were filled with amusement, his soft plump lips curled up in a small smirk. Her heart thumped. Cupping his face, she claimed his lips in a rough hot kiss, sending a rocket of pleasure through him whilst shocking him at her sudden move. He only hesitated for a moment before kissing her back with equal passion and hunger. Their lips moved in sync, both fighting for control with their tongues whilst their lips continued playing with the others. A soft moan escaped Scarlet as she pressed herself down against him. Pleasure and desire coursing through them both. Elijah svcked on her tongue before exploring her sweet mouth, reveling in the pleasure along with the fact she had been the one to kiss him first. He knew her answer without her even having to say anything. They kissed until they needed air. Breaking away, Elijah kissed her down her neck, sfking hard at the most sensitive corner, the place her mate would one day mark her. The very thought of her having a mate, at the thought of another male kissing her, made him feel a burning flare of anger rear its head within him. A very strong possessiveness overcame him. She tensed, moving back. He quickly turned his head away, not wanting her to see them. "You okay?" she asked. She had sensed the shift in his emotions. He looked into her eyes. "Perfectly, so I presume this is a yes," he said, gripping her throat slightly tight, yet not so tight that she could not breathe, the move only adding to the wee-dotness in her underwear. He ran his pierced tongue over her lips, making her moan softly as she svcked on the tip. Feeling him throb hard, she ground her body against him, making him rest his head back. "It's a yes, with some rules," she said, loving the control she had over him, watching him bite back his groans of pleasure. "Oh yeah? What rules?" he asked huskily, letting his eyes roam over her body. "As long as we do this, there cannot be anyone else. When we want to end it, the other has to accept it. We both know this is something that has to stay secret," she said, her voice slightly breathless. A soft sigh escaping her as the scent of her stole the air and only made Elijah want her right there. "Anything else, sweetheart?" he asked, slipping his hand under her top and grabbing her before kissing her lips. "When and if I meet my mate, you can't ever mention this, and the same goes for your mate," she said, now looking guilty as she stopped moving. Elijah frowned. "What's to hide? You're my brother, Elijah. This is end up even if we're both you know, into it. If anyone found out Mum, Dad. Indigo, she shivered at the thought, her eyes no longer clouded with LVST. She felt an ache inside her chest. In an ideal world, they would not have been related. In an ideal world, they could have been mates. A wave of sadness washed over her and she knew she could never tell Elijah about her feelings. How she had feelings for him for a few years now. Stepbrother. Red, I've told you before it's no big deal, but fine, we won't tell Dad and Jessica. I still don't get why you think it's taboo, his lips meeting her neck again. You're only interested in me just because I now look good to you. What if Indigo turns into a gorgeous chick once she's 18? Would you like her too? She said bluntly. Elijah cringed, just the thought made his building pleasure subside instantly. Yuck, no. God, she's my kid sister, he said, looking repulsed. Scarlet raised an eyebrow, exactly her point. She's my blood sister, remember? She said, emphasizing the my. I'm messed up. Fine, secret it is. No one will know. When either of us is satisfied and wants to move on, we don't hold the other back, he said, although he did not know if he would be able to keep his side of that bargain. Something told him Scarlet was going to become an addiction he would never want to let go of. Scarlet nodded despite the wave of sadness that engulfed her. She knew this was a dangerous game that would inevitably shatter her heart. She cared for him, the fear of falling deeper and then having him brutally torn from her stung. But she would hold on to what she had today and live in the moment, cherishing whatever time they will have. Then you have yourself a deal, Alpha Westwood. She said seductively. I'm all yours, perfect, I promise you won't regret this, he said, gripping the back of her head. He pulled her closer, kissing her roughly once more. After their small kissing session they had gotten back on the road. Her father's pack was near the town of Kendall. Heavy green forests made up most of the pack lands. From what research Elijah had done, it was an impressive pack, with over 1500 members. Although the Alpha did not have the best reputation, said to be ruthless, cold, and brutal. It was in total a near 6 hours drive from their pack territory. They would stop at a town before Kendall for the night, get dinner, and rest up before traveling into the Desert Storm pack territory. The name itself sent a shiver down Scarlet's back. They both knew it was risky, and with no backup anything could happen. However, it was the only option and Elijah was not going to let Scarlet do this alone. Just thinking about it made him realize it had been a crazy decision on her half. The rest of the journey after their little heated conversation had been pleasant. They had stopped at a service station grabbing crisps, chocolates and bottles of drinks. Then chatted whilst Elijah drove. Night had fallen and the further up north they got the cooler it became. Are you sure you don't want me to take over? Scarlet asked, biting into a salt and vinegar crisp. I'm good, after what you did to your own car. I don't think so, he said, making her glare. For your information, that was because of those dumb dogs, she said, ing her lips. Elijah watched her wanting to taste those lips again, but as much as he wanted to, he knew he needed to keep driving. He chuckled. You know it's an insult to call a wolf a dog, he said amused. It's actually an insult to a dog to call them dogs, she said smirking slightly. Offering him the packet, he opened his mouth instead and she rolled her eyes, popping one into it for him. So, tell me, what's your dating history? I mean a girl, he said, making Scarlet frown. That's so sweet. What has my looks got to do with me? I don't think men should even have the right to ask such a question. I mean, you don't see us women going around and saying you're not right? Or judging you guys. Elijah blinked. Chill out, feisty pants. I was just saying, since I know many of the men are into you, but you're not interested, well, don't. She said, huffing. She looked out the window, a sad expression crossed her face, one Elijah could not see. When he thought she would not reply, she spoke, her voice soft, barely able to hear her over the music that played softly in the background. I did have a boyfriend once. Elijah looked at her sharply. It was not the fact she had a boyfriend, but the pure sadness that oozed from her tone. Feeling a pang of jealousy towards the male he did not even know, he controlled his emotions, speaking calmly. Who was he? He asked, masking his emotions. A human. That was not what Elijah was expecting to hear. Not even knowing what to make of it, he stayed silent. Relationships with humans were not really approved of unless they were your mate, which was rare. But it did happen. 2 wolves in his own pack were mated to humans. But even then the procedure was delicate and the mated wolf had to be patient. There were several reasons not to date a human if they were not your mate. It put them in the line of danger. More questions would arise and the risk of them finding out the truth was higher. Although they went to a human school, there were strict rules about keeping identities a secret. Even if no one had a wolf at that age, the strength and speed were a lot more than the average human. He was brought out of his thoughts as Scarlet continued speaking. His name was Aiden. I was 15 when I first met him. I was crossing the road, and I was so lost on my phone with my headphones on, I didn't notice the car speeding towards me. He pushed me out the way and was hit instead. She took a shaky breath. There was still a small part of her inside that was kept for her first love. She smiled wryly. I would have healed, but he was a mess. He spent 3 months in hospital thanks to that crazy heroic act. He was in a coma. I visited him a couple of times a week, talking to him, threatening him that he better wake up, that I did not want his death on my head for the rest of my life. She let out a weak laugh, and Elijah glanced at her, feeling a strange emotion inside, one he could not put a name to, tempted to stroke her hair, but he kept it resting on the steering wheel, running the other through his own tousled hair. Then what happened? Didn't he have family? He asked seriously. She nodded. He had a mom, but she was working overtime to pay the hospital bills. They had moved to England for a better life. I took up tutoring and waitressing as well. I wanted to help. He was in that state because of me. And although his mom never blamed me, that just made me feel worse. She told me he was an aspiring footballer. His dream was to play for England one day. He woke up finally after 3 dreaded months. And we became friends. It wasn't like what we have, it was different, sweet, pure, welcoming. Maybe it's 'cause I was just 15, I don't know. Anyway, he and his mum refused to take money from me. And he said if I'm truly sorry and want to make it up to him, I should go out on a date with him. I agreed and he looked shocked when I did. She smiled softly, remembering the moment. We hit it off, and begun dating for real. Those were 4 beautiful months. I gave myself to him on his 17th birthday, and it was perfect. Although his dream of becoming a footballer was ruined thanks to that accident, he had some severe injuries. He never let it dampen his spirit. I wish I could have healed him, wish I had the power to help him. But through it all, he kept smiling. She stopped, taking a shaky breath, and Elijah was shocked to see that she was fighting back tears. She turned her head towards the window. "What happened to him?" he asked quietly, knowing something bad had occurred. Being the hero he was, selfless, loving and one with a golden heart, his goodness was his end. He jumped into a canal to save 2 young boys who had fallen in. The weather was terrible that night. He saved them, but he didn't make it, she said, her voice breaking, thinking, "Don't cry, not in front of him." She clamped her hand over her mouth, trying to stop her sobs. "We were supposed to meet that evening to go to the movies. It was hard meeting with Mom and Dad, not getting suspicious. I had to be careful. He had told me he loved me so many times, but I still hadn't. That night I was ready to say it, but he never came. I was so mad. I was cursing him, leaving him angry voice messages, threatening I was going to break up with him, not knowing the police were trying to find his body. When I heard that something had happened in the nearby canal, I got a bad feeling, and I ran towards the scene. I got there just when they pulled him out of the water. His gorgeous dark skin looked grey. Even before they confirmed it, I knew he was gone." Her voice broke and she sobbed softly, trying to suppress them, bending over in her seat, pressing her chest to her knees, squeezing her eyes shut. Elijah felt guilt fill him. When he had returned home 2 summers ago, she was colder, more withdrawn and lashed out more, but it was clear she had grieved and suffered in silence. Did that change her back then? He reached over, rubbing her back gently. Scarlet remembered the 8 months of her brooding and sadness, not wanting to tell anyone what was up, her parents thinking it was the teenage hormones. She had only begun to heal when Elijah had returned, and she had silently begun seeing him differently. He had been the one to heal her heart unknowingly, but on the other hand, it was a love she knew he would never return, and that had only caused her pain too. "I'm sorry," he said, not knowing what else to say. She was so much more than just a gorgeous woman. And he wanted to know everything about her, but what made Scarlet Malone the feisty temptress that she was? They drove in silence, Elijah's hand not leaving her back. Even when she had stopped crying, he still rubbed her back. His touch was comforting, welcoming, and it calmed her. She did not lift her head, too ashamed that she had shown some weakness in front of him, She had never told anyone about Aiden before. But it felt good to get it off her chest. It was only when they entered Lancaster, a city not too far from Kendall, that Scarlet lifted her head, looking at the glittering streetlights that lined the quiet streets. It was past 11:30 p.m. and the streets were pretty dead. "There should be a premiere in around here," Elijah said, glancing at her, glad to see she looked normal. She nodded, not meeting his gaze, not ready to after having cried. "There," she said, pointing to the familiar purple sign, taking her seat belt off. Elijah parked up before rubbing his neck, rolling it to get the kinks out. "Sitting in a car for that long did get your body all stiff." He looked at her as she gathered up her phone and belongings. "Red," he said. "Yeah," she said, glancing at him, about to look away when he took hold of her chin, making her heart skip a beat. She did her best, trying to hold his cerulean blue gaze. "You're one of the bravest people I know. It's okay to feel. I may not have known him, but he was one lucky to have captured your heart," he said, caressing her smooth skin with his thumb. Her heart skipped a beat when he leaned in and placed a deep, tender kiss on her lips. It was different, not fueled by lust. His lips were soft, the fresh honeyed taste of his mouth delicious. His intoxicating scent consumed her. A surge of emotions ran through her. She kissed him back with equal softness, both caressing the other lips, as if committing it to memory. Each caress, each touch. He pulled back after a moment, hearing her racing heart. "You have a thing for forbidden relationships, don't you?" he teased, trying to cheer her up. "A human witch is not allowed, and now your step-brother. Hey, this was your idea, and it's not a relationship," she said, her heart skipping a beat. Elijah's smirk vanished, realizing what he had said. The same thought went through them both. That kiss they had just shared was different. "You know what I mean, involvements," he said, getting out. Pushing the thought of that kiss out of his head, he got the luggage out and both walked into the inn. Scarlet excused herself to use the toilets, leaving the luggage with Elijah, who booked them in. When she returned, he held up a key card. She narrowed her eyes. "You better not give me that cliched 'they only had one room' that only happens in books and movies," she growled. Elijah smirked. "Nope, they had a few, but I booked one. We're in another town. It's safer if we stay close," he said. Scarlet crossed her arms. I never knew baby Alpha Lijawija needed protection," she cooed, pulling his cheek. He glared at her, tugging free. She snatched the card from him and looked at the room number, heading to the lift. Elijah followed. "You're the one who would need protecting," he muttered, hating how she somehow got the better of him. "He was the alpha," she snorted. "Yeah, whatever, you're delusional," she said as she pressed the button to their floor. She looked into his moody face, feeling that familiar. She was sharing a room with Elijah. He caught her looking, a smirk crossing his lips. "What's wrong? Not nervous that we're sharing a room, right?" he whispered, leaning closer. She pushed him away, but he refused to budge. "Elijah," she said warningly. He simply smirked, looking down at her rising and falling chest before he stepped back. Tonight was going to be interesting. The lift dinged and the doors slid open, and both stepped out and headed to their room. Unlocking the door, Scarlet was relieved to see there were 2 single beds. Despite only having a 6-inch gap between them, he smirked. Not too disheartened that there's 2 beds instead of 1, he asked, dumping the luggage down. She gave him a look. No, it's just a shame the beds aren't further apart, she said, glaring at him. I'm showering first, we could shower together. Elijah said, walking towards her. Her heart hammered, feeling the familiar excitement rush through her. I don't think so, she said, her legs hitting the bed. Elijah smirked, pushing her onto the bed, making her gasp. Before she could even get up, he had her straddled, his hands holding her wrists against the sheets. You really need to stop doing that. Doing what? He said huskily. Manhandling me, she said. She would not admit it, but the way he handled her turned her on. His lips met her neck, making her gasp, feeling the familiar wetness between her legs. Get used to it, because I don't do gentle, he whispered in her ear, inhaling her deeply, the scent of her arousal making him throb. He flicked his tongue across her neck, sending a shiver of pleasure running through her. Good, neither do I, she shot back challengingly. He smirked, thinking she was perfect. About to kiss her, he heard her stomach rumble, making her groan. He chuckled. Seriously? Considering the number of snacks you ate, he said, getting off her. If he was to get food, he needed to get it before shops closed for the night. She sat up, pouting, rubbing her tummy. I'm a big girl, she said. Elijah's gaze fell to her. Definitely a big girl, he said. She looked up, seeing where he was looking, her heart skipping a beat. If he continued to tease her, she did not know what would happen. And although she agreed to this, she was not ready to rush into anything so quickly. She wanted him, yet when the opportunity was presenting itself, it was daunting. She wanted him, that was for certain, but the timing was not right, not yet. What do you fancy? He asked. Fish and chips? If you can't find that, a burger or pizza is fine, she said, kicking off her shoes. He nodded, taking the key card. I shouldn't be long, she nodded, and Elijah left the room. Stretching, she stood up, plugging her phone into charge. She pulled her top off and unzipped her pants. Just as she was shimmying out of them, the hotel door opened. I forgot my... Elijah's words trailed off, his gaze falling to the hot view before him, her smooth creamy skin a canvas for him to mark. The more he saw of her, the more he desired her. She was so perfect, he wanted her. She froze, turning when she heard the low growl that came from Elijah. Her heart thudded when he entered the room, kicking the door shut behind him, advancing towards her, the look of raw clear in those dark blue eyes. Elijah approached her, the sheer sight of her turning him on. Never had a woman had such a strong effect on him. Was it because she was not falling to her knees in an attempt to please him? He didn't know, and he didn't care. His eyes trailed over her creamy smooth skin, He advanced and she retreated until her back hit the wall. "Elijah," she said, her voice coming out softer than she meant to. He looked down at her, trying to fight the urge to take her tight there. She could see the struggle as he fought with himself to hold back. "Scarlet," he said huskily, "I don't know what you've done, but I can't stop thinking about how you taste, the way you call my name. I want you, baby. How long will you keep me waiting?" He murmured in between, placing kisses down her neck. Scarlet's eyes fluttered shut. His touch left delicious of pleasure that only fueled the raging desire within her. All rationale was swiftly leaving her mind. "You're not like the rest, Red," he murmured before he pushed himself away. He knew she still wasn't fully ready, and although that irked him, she had agreed and he would take it at her pace. He turned his back on her, running his hand through his hair. Scarlet looked at him. She knew what she was afraid of, afraid that after one taste, he would get bored and end it. Perhaps that was for the better. If she got it over with, she would not have to fall deeper. Her eyes ran over his muscular back in his leather jacket. He looked as ever too. "Elijah," she said softly, closing the distance he had put between them. She slid her arms around him. She felt him tense and then a low groan escaped him. "Kitten," he murmured. Her heart raced at the pet name and she began to undo his zipper. "What are you doing, Red? What does it look like?" she whispered, wishing she could reach his neck, but he was an entire foot taller than her. "I'm not ready yet, but I can still please you," she murmured, their lips moving hungrily against one another. Her hands pushed his jacket off and he helped her, letting it slide to the floor. She seemed satisfied, pressing herself fully against him with only the thin t-shirt now between them. He was very aware of her. Their tongues caressing each other's, he ravished her mouth, exploring every inch. With her it felt like it was never enough. He craved more. He moved away from the wall and to one of the beds, dropping her onto it. He watched her. Her green eyes coated with desire, her pouty lips parted as her eyes roamed his body. He pulled his shirt off, his eyes locked on the goddess before him. She looked into his eyes before running her hand over his balls, loving the softness against her hands. She did not break their gaze as she lowered herself. Her tongue slowly ran along the smooth tip, making him hard. Her need for him was growing and she really wanted to just let him do. There was not an inch of him that was not perfect, as if the goddess had carved him with flawless precision. She wrapped her mouth around his tip, slowly taking him in. He gripped the back of her hair, pleasure coursing through him. "That's it!" he groaned as he began starting. It was the first time Scarlet had given anyone. Her and Aiden's relationship had been simpler and more innocent, they only had linked one time. She was not sure if she was doing it right, but she knew enough to know how the concept worked and just hoped he would be satisfied. Seeing him with his head slightly tilted back, a groan of pleasure leaving his lips made pleasure rush through her. She took more and more of him in, his eyes darkened with the building pleasure. He could see the hunger in hers, the desire burning within them. That's it," he muttered. She moaned against him, only adding to the pleasure. "Oh God, you're perfect," he grunted. It was getting rougher, but it only made the desire in her own body grow. Her eyes stung with tears at the sheer force that he was her mouth with. His moves became faster and harder. "I'm going to come," he muttered, about to tug her back when her breathless voice came through the mind link. "I want you to come in my mouth." Those simple words made him come undone. He groaned in pleasure. "You taste delicious, like salted caramel, my favorite," she said with a wink, her voice slightly raspy. He didn't reply, instead he grabbed her. She truly was beautiful. She watched him admire her, her heart hammering. This was wrong. He was meant to be her step-brother, but it felt so right. "Oh, yeah," she moaned. Nothing had ever tasted this good, loving how she did not act like a weak, delicate thing, groaning in satisfaction when she moved her body against his face. Elijah did not stop. "You're delicious, wouldn't you agree, kitten?" he said in a husky voice, a smirk on his lips. She blushed lightly. She said breathlessly. He growled. "That's not an answer." "Yes," she murmured. It left Elijah feeling satisfied yet. It had felt so good. She did not care if it was forbidden. She wanted him. Right now, his touch was all she wanted. When he moved back those blue eyes of his glinting with satisfaction, she knew he had enjoyed it too, and she silently knew the next time they got intimate, she was ready to give him her all. He had given birth to an addicting desire within her. Seeing his godlike body once again before her, only driving her crazier. He wanted her too, and until he had had enough, she would take it. Knowing she would not be the one to walk away first. She smiled slightly, caressing his jaw. She would deal with her broken heart when the time came. For now, this would be their forbidden secret. That was perfect. It was those little things that truly affected her. "See you in a bit." He made quick work of getting dressed, Scarlet shamelessly checking out his fine as but looking away smoothly when he turned back towards her. His eyes running over her body one final time before he left the room, this time remembering his wallet. Scarlet sat up slowly, looking down at her body. There were marks scattered across her neck, one or two even on her. She lay back once again, replaying the events that had just occurred. She could still feel his fingers within her. "Not thinking about me, are you?" His voice came through the mind link. She looked at the door. "No. I'm about to shower," she said. His laugh came in her head. "Might mun, if you say so, Red." His reply came back. Scarlet smiled softly, not replying as she got off the bed. Her legs felt like jelly. She gathered her clothes and dumped them in her washing bag and back into her suitcase. Taking out her toiletries and nightwear, she hurried to the bathroom, wanting to be done by the time Elijah returned. Scarlet had just showered, moisturized, and finished blow-drying her hair when Elijah returned. Her heart skipped a beat seeing him stood there. She could still smell their earlier antics on him, not missing how his eyes ran over her. Wearing an oversized off-shoulder top with Princess Mulan on it and black leggings, she looked good, he thought. He didn't miss that fact. Her smooth creamy skin was on show and the marks he had left were already beginning to fade slightly. By tomorrow afternoon they would probably be fully gone, he thought. He liked his mark on her. You were quick. Luckily there was a chip shop around the corner and they were about to shut shop, but I persuaded them to take my order. He said, giving her a smirk. He placed the paper bags on the bed next to her. Perfect timing, or were you just blaming your alpha power? She said, rubbing her stomach, only making his attention go to her. Either way you got your chips. Start eating, I'll be out soon. He said, wanting to kiss her sore-looking lips. He usually never cared for stuff like that unless it led to get it on. Not waiting for a reply, he left the room, leaving Scarlet a little confused. She shook her head, pushing the thought aside, and opened the bags, her stomach rumbling loudly. Elijah showered quickly, forgetting to get his own toiletries. He just used hers. The image of her on her knees in front of him, his DCK in her mouth, flashed through his mind. He groaned. He had thought he'd be a little satisfied once he had a taste of her, but it just seemed to have made him hornier. Washing quickly, he stepped out of the shower, wrapping a towel around his waist. He had not even brought his clothes in. He wiped the steam from the mirror, looking at his reflection. His gaze falling to the deep red marks on his neck, leaning closer he inspected the scratches. They were as fresh as if he had just gotten them. They should have been gone by now. He was an alpha and they were not even that deep. Why weren't they healing quickly? Remembering what happened to Hank, he grew curious. There was something different about Scarlet, her wolf size, the unique color, her strength, and now this. He re-entered the bedroom, seeing Scarlet had arranged the food on a plastic bag on one of the beds. She wasn't eating, clearly waiting for him and browsing the TV. Her eyes shifted to him, trailing over his body. She licked her lips without realizing, making Elijah growl. Don't, he said warningly. Don't what? She asked, raising an arched eyebrow. Don't lick your lips or I'll put them to good use, he murmured, coming and sitting on the bed. Her eyes widened as she stared at him. Aren't you going to get dressed? She asked, thinking how was she supposed to focus if he was sat there with just a towel on. Why does it bother you? He teased mockingly. Just admit it, I am the strongest man you've ever seen. You mean the most annoyingly guy? Yet, Scarlet replied, refusing to help inflate his already huge ego. One you find completely right, he said. She rolled her eyes in reply. He watched her unwrap her fish and chips and began eating, a soft moan of satisfaction leaving her lips when she bit into a chip. Goddess, I'm starved. She groaned, ing the salt and vinegar off her finger. Not even noticing that Elijah was watching her, wondering how he never really noticed some stuff about her. Her ears were pierced several times, including her tragus on her right ear, which he could see from where he sat. She had dimples when she smiled, her lashes were long and her face was pretty expressive. He smiled slightly as he too began eating, having bought himself a chicken fillet burger and chips. "So, when is your alpha initiation ceremony?" she asked, turning her gorgeous green eyes on him but trying not to stare at his body. Elijah frowned deeply. "Dad's delaying it. It should have been finalized by now, but he was avoiding the conversation," he said, his voice cold. Scarlet looked up, sensing the anger and his alpha aura radiating off him in waves. "Hey, he probably has a reason," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder, trying not to focus on his body. She looked into his stormy eyes, his frown simply deepening. "It's an insult, as if I'm not worthy of being a alpha," he said coldly. "You will be an amazing alpha. I don't really want to make you any more big-headed than you already are, but you clearly care for your pack. You're mature, fair, and you know what's best for the pack. All you're missing is your Luna," she trailed off, a pang of hurt crossing her chest. Her heart raced and she removed her hand, looking down at her food. Elijah didn't miss the change in her heartbeat but didn't comment on it. "Yeah, that's exactly his reason. A Luna won't make me a better alpha. I don't need a mate and neither do I believe in love," he said. Scarlet looked at him. She did not agree with him. "That's not actually true. Dad isn't wrong. You need a Luna. You may not realize it now, but she will be an important part of your life. You say you don't believe in love, Elijah, but I'm sure when your mate is before you, you'll fall unconditionally in love with her." She smiled, her emotions hidden behind a perfect mask. Hiding the pain of imagining Elijah leaving her suddenly for his mate, she gulped down some orange juice, wanting to distract herself from her thoughts. Elijah only felt more angry, the way she was totally okay with him finding his mate. It was clear she did not really care about him. Just thinking about her with a mate of her own annoyed him off entirely. He had only just got her and he wanted to enjoy the time with her for as long as possible. "Are you looking forward to finding yours?" he asked coldly. She looked at him and nodded. "Yes, because I'm sure he'll love me. Although my father was an awful mate to my mother. Most mates are great. Look at Aaron and Monica, Auntie Adeline, and Uncle Damien, Jacob and Nick. They're perfect," she said, smiling softly, looking into his eyes. "I'm sure the moon goddess will give me a mate who will complete me in every way." Elijah's frown only deepened. Her speaking lovingly about some guy that she hadn't even met yet only further angered him. He wasn't sure if it was because of their strong difference of opinion or what, but his rage only flared up into a burning inferno within him. He leaned over, grabbing her by the neck, sending a rush of pleasure to her. "Well, until show turns up, you're mine, you'll be thinking about me," he said in a rough whisper. Scarlet frowned despite the ache that was throbbing within her. She looked into his eyes that were flickering from cerulean to cobalt. "Let you know if I do," although I don't think anyone can do me better than my mate." She shot back. Elijah growled, kissing her roughly. She gasped, not expecting him to. He took the chance to slip his tongue into her mouth, pushing her back on the bed and leaning over her. He kissed her harder, fueled by his emotions: passion, anger, possessiveness. For now, she was his, and he did not appreciate her talking about someone else. She pressed at his che-3st, trying to push him off, her own body betraying her as she moaned against his lips. Her eyes flew open, trying to get the annoyed alpha off her. She bit into his L.P. hard, tasting blood, but it did the job. "Red," he growled, breaking away and breathing heavily whilst sitting back on the other bed. What was that?" she said. Elijah eat his L.P., smirking arrogantly. "You're turned on, so you tell me." "Don't act so impulsively," she said, glaring at him. Her eyes fell to his neck, spotting the red scratches from earlier, and her anger decreased. She got off the bed. "What happened to your?" She trailed off, realizing it must have been her. She looked away. It was not the first time she had hurt someone and they had not healed. "Guess you like to leave a lasting mark," he said. Even his L.P. wasn't healing. She looked into his eyes, wondering if he thought she was a freak too. But she did not care. She was not about to change for anyone. "Your L.P. won't heal. I would say sorry, but you deserved it," she said, bending down to examine it. Her soft green orbs meeting his deep blue ones. "Maybe I did, but you could at least give me a kiss to make up for it," he said. She found herself straddling him. "One kiss and then bed," she said firmly, using all her willpower to not start grinding on him. "Make it a good one," he murmured. She looked into his eyes, her heart hammering. Leaning towards him, her lips met his softly. A strange emotion ran through Elijah as he closed his eyes, kissing her back. Something about these soft kisses they shared confused him, yet he enjoyed them. Their lips moved in sync as if performing a dance. Neither fought for control, both simply enjoying the soft touch of the other. Scarlet sighed softly, moving back, the honeyed taste of his mouth and jarring, the feel of his plush lips still tingled on hers. Her heart was pounding. She got off his lap slowly. Elijah let her, his eyes holding hers, his head feeling a little light. The effect she had on him was mind-blowing. "Good enough?" she asked, trying to lighten the odd mood that had settled. "You can say that," he said. Her gaze flickered to the obvious tent formed in his towel. Blushing lightly, she turned her back to him, gathering up the rubbish. Elijah simply leaned back on his hands, his eyes fixed on her. Oh, he couldn't wait for her, and something told him that day was going to be soon. Once she was done, she went to brush her teeth, relieved to see he had put some pants on when she had returned. Getting into bed, she switched the lights off, staring at the ceiling, very aware of how close he was on the other bed. "Are you ready to see him tomorrow?" he asked after a moment. Her heart thudded, remembering the traumatic experiences at her father's hand. A shudder ran through her body, glad Elijah could not see her from under her blanket. She could see his body outlined from where he lay on top of his sheets, her eyes dipping to the front of his pants. Feeling herself throb, she looked away, thinking she was worse than he was. Sighing, she pondered on what he just asked her. "I don't think I'll ever be ready, but, got this, I'm not a child he can hurt anymore," she said quietly. "And I'll be right there, no one's going to touch you," he said. She did not reply, silently appreciating his comment. Despite being strong, it was good to know you have someone in your corner. She fell asleep first, although it was a restless slumber, tossing and turning, memories of long ago plaguing her dreams. Elijah turned to look at the agitated woman a mere foot and a half away from him. He himself could not sleep, not with her scent invading his senses. He propped himself up on his elbow, watching her. Her hair fell in front of her face, a frown creasing her brow as she stirred in her sleep. He leaned over, brushing her hair out of her face, his gaze falling to those plump lips of hers. She really was gorgeous, even without a speck of makeup. She was a natural beauty, and he did not only mean her face. His gaze fell to her mounds, the clingy fabric of her top shaping them perfectly. He muttered, getting off the bed. He pushed his towards hers, closing the small gap between them. A smirk played on his lips when he got back on the bed and slowly tugged her onto his side. She stirred and he simply stroked her hair until she relaxed once again. Pulling her against his CHE3ST, he kissed the top of her head, inhaling her light floral scent, hoping she would at least sleep better in his arms. Satisfied when she snuggled against him, feeling the painful hard-on he had just about got rid of, sprang back into action. This was getting embarrassing, he thought. He might need to switch to baggy track pants and oversized hoodies. Resting his head on top of hers, he tried not to focus on the way her delicious curves were pressed against him and instead on the sweet scent of her freshly shampooed hair. He never slept with women, unless he was completely drunk, preferring to kick them out or leave himself right after he had got what he wanted. But with Scarlet it was different. With these thoughts swimming in his head, he fell asleep soon after. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.